Hi, and welcome to another episode of What We Wish We Had Known, which is Kelly and my series on issues that we had wished we had known more about before we became certified sex therapists. So, given the timing and what is going on post-election, we thought this would be a good episode to talk about when our clients, our couples, have issues with either one another or their families around party affiliation or policies that are impacting them directly. And so I thought I'd start by talking about one of the cases I had years ago where it was a heterosexual couple and the woman was pregnant. And there was a question as to whether she wanted to keep the pregnancy. And because they came from different religions, she didn't have any issue around the idea of abortion. Now, not to say that she wasn't ambivalent and torn about it emotionally, but it wasn't regulated or integrated to any ideology around sin. Yeah. And while her husband was brought up in a religion that was inherently against any sort of ending of pregnancies or abortions, he actually had a reaction to even the concept that she would be considering it. And it really impacted the sessions quite a bit. And so the other level that I think I wish I'd known more about is, how to weave those differences into the presenting issue of sexual problems and sexual avoidance and discrepant desire, right? Because this was one of those cases. And I think if I had known more about how to ask the right questions and how to bring them into discussing how their view of whether they felt respected or the view of how they felt unheard and unseen impacted the daily problem they were having or the weekly problem they were having of, are we going to be intimate and what would that look like? And do you still desire me? So that's one example that I was thinking about that has to do with maybe less, it is political, obviously, but it's also policies depending on what state you're living in, right?
Yeah. And that, it does tie into political. If it was now, right, there was all of these ballot measures around the country on abortion. And so let's say if we, bring that into today, maybe if the same couple was having this conversation, there would be another level instead of just about religion and how they each feel about it and those ideologies. But then it goes into, okay, so how are the policies that we're talking about and that we're voting on, right? That how does that impact the conversation? And is that something that would impact how the conversation goes in therapy?
Yeah. And also, we should mention, obviously, that with all of these cases, right, the other party in the room is us and how we feel about these topics and how do we ground ourselves when one of our clients says something, anything, right, that we may not agree with, affiliated with, and how do we keep grounded so we can just hold the space for them to figure the issue out for themselves, whether they're an individual or whether they're a couple. So there's that other piece of countertransference. And then how do you bring it back to the presenting problem of sexual discrepant desire?
Yeah, that's something too that when I was an early on therapist, I wish that I would have known better how to do or how to integrate these questions or conversations and like compartmentalizing and being able to recognize what's coming up in me, why it's coming up, and not bringing it into session has been something that is fairly easy for me to do just because I've been in human service work and you've always had to do that for since I was in the field since I was 18 years old. So it's always something that I've been good at, but then integrating it into the work that's something that I wish when I was earlier on therapist knew how to do better, because that is more nuanced and that is tricky, and it takes that experience and skill and someone like a supervisor showing you how to do it and how, what is appropriate and what's not appropriate in those conversations.
And one more thing I would add to that example is that what I didn't know before is all the medical research results around, for example, postpartum and depression. And this, if, I knew that this client, this woman did have very extreme postpartum. I knew at that time, because by that time I was a sex therapist, but I don't think I knew the stats, the statistics on the rates of postpartum increasing or repeating itself if you've had it one time and you've had a history of depression, and how that would impact her bonding with her child, which was also an issue that interrelated or intertwined with the sexual relationship between these partners. So all of those things, right?
Yeah. And having that knowledge really helps allow the conversation in the room to be deeper and to get to the core issues, right? So if we are keeping things kind of surface level, it's really difficult to move the conversation forward and maybe get to a place of resolution or understanding on each side. So having that background knowledge allows you to do deeper clinical work.
Well, so we were both trained, right, as social workers, and we learned the biopsychosocial model, the psychosocial model, I should say. But what I think we've gained as sex therapists is the biomedical piece as well, and the spiritual piece, right? And I think that this kind of case cuts through all of those issues. And I always say to clients that I'm going to put my sexuality or sexual health educator hat on now. Here are some facts that you may not know. Do the research. I can send you research outlines, do your own advocacy work for yourself. So that part, I don't think as a general therapist, I didn't do that. At least not around sexual health issues.
Oh, around sexual health issues? No. The only time I did that as a general therapist is when I was doing groups on relationships and sexuality. But in the individual work or couples work, that wasn't really something that I incorporated because I didn't have that knowledge, right? I didn't know the sexuality knowledge. It wasn't a course that I took in college or in any of the trainings until I specifically sought it out to, find research on.
So do you have an example of something from a case that you wish you had known, and what would have been that?
Yeah, I think when we were prepping for this, we were talking about how external influences can impact relationships, and how even if people within a relationship system they align politically, but maybe or on policies, but maybe their extended family doesn't. And one way that this can show up and has shown up, especially in this election, is, and I work with a lot of queer clients, is when there's a queer person in a relationship and they're in a mixed orientation in a relationship with a straight person, and the queer person is feeling the effects of the relationship, effects of the outcome of the election differently, and being around extended family that maybe voted for the party that is not aligned with their party, and how now that's impacting how they view that relationship, if they want to be around that person, if they feel like that those people are now viewing them differently, or that the way that they voted impacts, like, oh, maybe they don't see me as a person, or like my rights are being taken away, something like that. And the other person in the relationship, the straight person, is having difficulty empathizing or showing a lot of compassion for the queer person, not really understanding, like on an intellectual level, understanding about it, on an emotional level, not really understanding what is happening here. Why are you so upset? Why would these relationships change? And then that causes conflict in the relationship, which then also can create like one person to withdraw sexually, or both of them to withdraw sexually, or not, maybe they're still engaging in sex, but they're just not really there. They're not that present anymore. So it comes back to the sexual relationship and how these external factors not only influence like the external relationships, but that internal relationship too, in the sexual relationship.
And so you're meaning like the external relationships with like friends or family of origin, right? Not necessarily other partners.
Yeah.
This is like a sexually exclusive couple. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the relationship with, the extended family that their votes didn't align, or the political party didn't align.
So that's like an interpersonal thing that even though they might be aligned on the same policies or political party, they don't understand how they're coping or reacting to feeling so unseen or unheard or so different,
Yeah.
really, from their family of origin that it impacts kind of how they feel about themselves. And we know that that impacts level of desire, right?
Yeah.
If you're feeling
Yeah.
badly about your identity, if you're feeling badly about being marginalized, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
even within your own family and then with your partner.
Yeah. And then, that is not something that maybe before the election would have come up, because it like just it wasn't really talked about, or it wasn't really discussed, or now the election or the election season really brought it to light, and that now it's feeling so heavy for people.
And I think also I've seen that, when couples do align again, and then their families of origin shift,
Mm-hmm.
shift party affiliation, shift in their beliefs about what's being discussed in the media,
Mm-hmm.
and the couple feeling like, I don't how do we create a relationship? It creates so much cortisol in their system, because now they're hearing it from the media, right? And they're hearing it from their parents or their in-laws, and they're feeling like, how do we stay in relationship?
Yeah.
And how do we feel calm enough to be warm and intimate with one another, go out on a date when we're feeling bombarded, right?
Mm-hmm.
With some of the belief systems or political viewpoints that really impact our day to day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And bringing that back to the countertransference too, like if you as a therapist, maybe you're experiencing the same thing, right? Like if you have some views, your extended family or your family has other views, and you're dealing with that conflict as well, and then you're coming into the room and you're hearing about you're hearing about your clients dealing with it as well, monitoring what those emotions are that are coming up for you and how you're bringing that into the room. And bringing it into the room is like the questions that you're asking, or like how you're asking, right? Like those things are so important to be mindful of when, especially when there's something parallel like that going on, and it can feel very heavy.
Yeah. And I also wish I had known how to, um, we do a genogram,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we were both trained in family systems and taking a genogram of the partnership or the client, the individual client, their parents, their grandparents, how they came to this country, all of that. And I think that, and we usually see it also do it through a sexual history lens. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think sometimes I would hear the stories of the immigration, how
Mm-hmm.
someone came in here, and understand how that connected um, with the emotional piece and psychological identity in the past before I became a sex therapist. But as I became a sex therapist and seeing patterns of immigration and patterns around cultural belief systems and acceptances, and I'm thinking specifically around infidelity,
Mhm.
right? And those kinds of things are really important to check, because I've seen some patterns, right, going back generations of,
Mhm.
that in many sort of, I would say certain kinds of Latino communities, we know they're not a monolith, but in some
Mhm.
Latino communities or French communities or African American communities, again, very taking more details, right? This turning away from, a woman turning away from her husband's infidelity, it comes as like, well, that's what's going to happen. And we can't do it. This powerlessness, this is just the way it is.
Yeah.
As long as he doesn't disrespect the family and he comes home to his children, then, I'm going to turn away from it. I'm not going to look at it. And I think that also is a cultural and sometimes even political, in terms of, if a couple gets divorced or they decide to
Mhm.
separate, and custody and things like that. And so I think that, and obviously infiltrates their sex life, because,
Mhm.
you know, are they taking sexual health precautions? Are they
Yeah.
getting tested regularly? Um, do they believe that that's part of their responsibility?
Mhm.
Um, are the person who's not heading out, and seeing other people, are they asking for that for their own benefits? So all of those things, I think, are interwoven with the cultural, um, and at times policies
Mhm.
of community and our larger society.
Yeah. And noticing those patterns and having that understanding allows you to then have a better conceptualization of what's happening in the relationship dynamic and with this couple, so then you can better help them, right? Like, we want to get as much information as possible and do like this comprehensive assessment so that we can have the best outcomes as possible. And doing the genogram and doing the sexual history allows us to gather that information.
Yeah. I think that also, depending on where you are in the country, and
Mhm.
even depending where you are in your county.
Mhm.
I've supervised therapists who are in counties that are, lean one way or
Mhm.
the other, and they themselves may not always agree with the majority of that county. And so for them, literally having to remain neutral, not talk about their own political affiliations or beliefs around legislation, um, but holding space and letting every client feel supported and heard, can be very challenging. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And we're at time.
Okay. So, thanks for listening. And as always, our website is www.eroticacademy.net.
Mhm.
And we have our applications open right now, registrations for the Sexuality Educated and Erotically Informed Therapist or Coach training, which is launching in January, is on the website. And we would love to answer any of your questions you have. Our email is eroticacademy24@gmail.com.
Yeah. Thanks.